It is another Friday afternoon here at the Roundtable. Welcome to everybody out there in Twitch, Internet Land, and everybody listening via podcast app, whether you are listening on demand with us or whether you're joining us elsewhere on some sort of audio podcast or something like that. We've got a bunch of people in the chat already. Beggy Man's going to get fired from Target, so good luck. I think it's a good trade-off to listen to us and hang out in the chat versus actually working at Target. This coming from somebody who worked at Target from the ages of 16 till 18. Actually, I picked up a lot of bad habits at Target, mainly slacking on the job in the garden center and eating all the popcorn from Food Ave and really throwing those nasty hot dogs from the Food Ave away. I would get yelled at for that all the time. So Lady Iju is going to get fired as well. Hey, okay, let's introduce some people and then we can kind of go around the horn. Joining us all the way from the great state of Canada is Mr. Templar 10. Templar, if you had to work any menial job for 2 years, where would it be?
Any menial job for 2 years?
Yeah, because I'm considering Target a menial job.
Sure. I mean, I worked at Walmart for a year and a half.
Okay, well,
I worked at Burger King was my first job. I worked there for 2 years.
Okay.
I liked working at Home Depot, so maybe I'd work there
Home
again.
Depot sounds like fun, though. You can bring dogs in there.
It was fine, yeah.
Not as an employee, right? I mean, they don't let you show up as an employee with a dog, do they?
I don't know their policies. I didn't write them.
I never tried. I couldn't say.
That voice you heard all the way from the middle of northern Pennsylvania is TheLift, aka Pastor Mark of Lux Digital Church. And Mark, what would be your, or let me rephrase it this way. What was your very first menial labor job like that?
I worked for a woman who paid me 75 cents per pint of blackberries that I picked. And I'm not even joking. That was my first job. It was a woman who owned like a small produce farm that she would take stuff to local farmers markets. She paid you $10 per field that you weeded, 75 cents per pint or container of berries that you picked. I mean, it was bad. I would work 7 or 8 hours on a field and I would make, $10 or $15. So
well, two things,
yeah, not great.
Two things come up. Number one, is this Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley? And number two, like, how old were you?
13.
Okay. I thought you were going to say 30 and I was going to be like, whoa, bro.
Maybe younger.
Okay. All right. Well, I
might have been like 10. I don't remember. I was pretty young. It's like at 12, I started working for my mom delivering wedding cakes. And then at 16, I started landscaping. So
Gotcha. Yeah. Beggy Man, it was not a diss at all. I remember my days at Target. I'm ancient. So my days at Target, minimum wage was like $2.50, it felt like. And joining us from the heartland of the USA, Navalis, what was your first job as such?
I was a lifeguard.
Oh, that sounds fun though. That's like there's a prestige to that.
There isn't. It's boring.
Okay, fair enough.
I just mainly made sure older folks didn't drown, and so that was my pool. There was like nothing interesting happened. It was indoors. I did almost save an older lady doing water aerobics. She was probably in her 80s. She was on a pool noodle, like because they bounce up and down on pool noodles because they keep them afloat. And she flipped over, and her pool noodle went underneath her legs, and so she couldn't get. I know this sounds bad, but she couldn't get back up, so she was driving herself with the pool noodle, like lifting her feet up in the water. So I had to help. That was like the most exciting thing that happened. Okay.
You're a freaking hero. You're a freaking hero.
Oh, slow clap. Let's get some fives in chat and slow clap for Navalis saving a life.
Get this man a Purple Heart.
Absolutely.
Get him a Purple
and
Heart.
a Bronze Star and whatever else we can get, and a Book It certificate and whatever else we can get him. Let's get on it. We are hey, look at that. Thanks, Jenny, for the Breathe Chino in the chat. We're joined by a bunch of people in the chat right now. Lady Iju, Beggy Man, Jenny, Josh Hanback, Bougie's in the chat. I saw a couple other people that I can't scroll up on the screen. Sheaves is in here as well. What's up there, people? Thanks for all of the support and hanging out. Hey, the Roundtable is we ostensibly do this live every other week on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Lux Digital Church, and we are turning this into a podcast actually as well. You can find us on all of your audio podcast apps, wherever you would like to take our lovely voices and laughter and me choking on my LaCroix from hearing that story. You can take that with us and share that with your friends and make sure that they are getting some of the Roundtable goodness as well. Today we are actually jumping into a couple of topics. First and foremost, as we always do, however, we want to get some of the fun stuff out of the way. We want to talk about what we've been playing, consuming, watching, listening to, doing all those things in nerd culture. And Nav, since you are the hero of the day, the Foo Fighters song is playing in the background. I'll try to add that in the edit, because I don't think we'll get cut off for that. What have you been playing, watching, consuming, doing all that in nerd culture?
Let's see. I've been Lord of the Rings, which we'll talk about that in a future episode. Yes. But I've been watching that. Let's see here. Watching Only Murderers in the Building. It's on Hulu. It's a good show. Has Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. It is a really good show. I highly recommend it.
Are you in season 2 right now?
I just finished season 2.
Oh,
so
okay. And thumbs up, thumbs down.
I thumbs up. Okay. I thumbs up. I enjoyed it. It wasn't as good as the first season, but I still think the second season was good. I still think it's like, I'm interested to see where it's going. I'm enjoying. It's a good show. I'm enjoying it. Good writing, fun concept. It's different than what's out there. So they make fun of themselves throughout this, which is nice, and it's not trying to take it seriously.
But
anyway,
they make fun of Sting too, which I thought was great.
Yes, to make fun of Sting, but they make fun of just all kinds of stuff. But anyway, it's a good show. I've been playing Xenoblade 3. That is quite fun. I'm trying to finish it by the end of the month. We will see how that goes. And it's a big game. I'm not trying to do too many of the side quests. Then I've been reading. Thank you, Chino, for bringing this on. I have been reading Brandon Sanderson's The Way of King series. All right. And so it is awesome. So anyway, thank you. So we'll have to talk about that later. Okay. Because we'll have to talk about Kaladin and Shalon and the other characters. So anyway,
there's actually somebody in our Discord, discord.gg/Lux Digital Church. If you want to join in there, we can hit the Lux command in chat in just a second. Bow down to Might. He and I got in a long conversation about it because his name is actually Zeth, SZETH, and we got in a long conversation about that because I pointed out, I was like, hey, that's from that Sanderson book, right? He goes, oh my, you actually read it? I was like, yes, dude, I read it.
Okay, I need to message him because I saw that. I was like, I need to message him because that's the only time I've seen that is like in the book, period. There's like, that's like, yeah, so okay. I'll have to message him.
Cool.
All right.
What else?
That's
Anything
what I've been doing.
Okay, cool.
That's it.
Mark, what about you? What have you been watching, listening to, playing, consuming in nerd culture as you stretch?
Well, of course, we watched the first episode of Lord of the Rings. Haven't finished it. We're going to talk about that next in 2 weeks. Beyond that, I rediscovered this little game called Destiny 2.
Oh, tell me about that. Is that a action RPG?
It's not actually. It's a looter shooter, they say.
Oh.
But yeah, it seems like there's a lot of people playing it right now. So Chino Mage is playing it. Templar downloaded it, streamed it today. A little bit of spoiler for what these guys have been playing. A bunch of other folks been playing. I've been playing with Frost from Love Thy Nerd, with Aki from Aki and Peach and the Warriors of Light. Had the opportunity to play with a lot of really great groups. Reconnected with a friend of Lux and a former Dream Team member, Yosti Toasty, and he plays a lot of D2 as well. So I've been playing that with him. And beyond that, I found I went back to a podcast that I've been listening to last summer by I don't remember what it's like, who it's by, but it's basically a guy who's reading the Dritz books, and he reads them in chronological order. So he starts off with, I don't know, Exile or Sojourner or whatever the Homeland, whatever the first one is, and each episode is a chapter or two of the Dritz books that he puts together, and you can just listen to them. And you might be like, well, I just listen to audiobooks. And you can, but these are free because it's a podcast. So I have never been an audiobook listener, but I've been listening to them. And I just finished the second book in the first trilogy, I believe. I may have finished the third book in the first trilogy. I'm not real sure. I can't remember. Each one is about like 25 episodes long, and really like thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's what I've been sort of listening to. That's like I'm going to go mow the grass. I'm going to pop something in my ears. I'm going to listen to the Dritz storylines, and it just inspires me so much to play a dark elf and play D&D. And yeah, other than that, D&D's taken up some of my time recently because we're getting ready for the Lux D&D launch, which launched last night. Played with Templar last night too. A lot of fun. And yeah, that's me and nerd culture. But Destiny 2, I've been on the hard grind. The last like 2.5 weeks playing D2 for sure.
Yeah, we'll get to what I'm playing in a second, but I'm super jealous of the time that you're able to devote to that, because I watch your number going up and I salivate every time I go to stream or every time I go to play with my son. Like, man, Mark is just like, he's like 20 light levels ahead of me. And I just need to quit my job is what I need to do. I just need to quit everything and just get on that grind for a little bit.
Just take a week off.
Your lips to God's ears. Templar. Yeah, and Bougie actually answered the question that I was going to ask the question. Does he use different voices for each character? And how does he deal with the pronunciation of all of the weird sort of Menzoberranzan dark elf stuff? Is he good with that?
Yeah, he does a really good job with it. And it has like multiple voices. In fact, like I'm going to throw the link in the chat because I just found it. He actually got a deal to now begin recording audiobooks. So he's that good, but it's actually done really, really well. Like he gets all the names right and he gets the accents done really well. Dritz is voiced super well. If you guys don't know, there's a gnome from Blingenstone who's a part of the first trilogy that is really cool. He does that voice really, really well. He does a really good job with all of sort of like the drow culture and really captures that stuff well with his voice. So it's been nothing but a joy. I went ahead and threw the link in the chat if you want to go and listen to it. If you've never listened through any of the Dritz stuff before, I've never read them, never listened to them, don't know anything about them, it's done really well. So check it out.
I was addicted to those books. I was an R.A. Salvatore nerd. And kind of going back to this, I guess my question is, how is he not getting sued?
I have literally no idea. Like, I don't know how he's just like, I'm sure there's some place somewhere that explains it, but I don't know where that place is, because I was like, how is he just literally just reading the books and putting them on a podcast? Like, he doesn't find it, but like, it can't be legal, right? Like unless he's gotten like some sort of express permission that I'm completely unaware of. But I was like, you can't just read books that people have to buy and put them for free onto the internet. Like, that's not a thing that you can do, but he hasn't been stopped yet. And he's on book like 9. So
I was going to say my wife, she listens to like, there's like other podcasts that read like murder and mystery novels and stuff like that are people just read them on podcast form. So this is not, and those don't get taken down. So I don't know. There must be like a loophole or something. I don't know. Like,
interesting.
Not sure.
Cool. Templar, what have you been outside of Destiny 2? I want to hear about your adventures and travails in there, but what have you been playing, watching, listening to, consuming in nerd culture?
Well, I just started Destiny 2 a little bit today. So I played the intro.
Is this your first
mission.
go in Destiny?
I played the original one a little bit, I think. Because the mission was the same, but Sheeb said that they imported the opening mission from Destiny 1 into Destiny 2. So the mission did seem familiar, but there was no record of my character or anything that I had made. So I think I had played a little bit of the first one back in the day. But so, yeah, I'm not that far into it, but so far it's fine. I think once I get I'll probably focus on the campaign stuff. Once I get into the really grindy sort of strikes and the stuff where you have to kind of do the same thing a dozen times, I'll probably be out, but I'm having a good time for now. So yeah, beyond that, last episode, I had mentioned that I had started The Expanse, and Nav was quite enthusiastic about that one as well. spoke quite highly of that. And I think I had just started the first season, so I watched all 6 seasons in 8 days.
Did you sleep?
So yeah. So I finished the show. And it's great. I mean, obviously, as I got pretty hooked on it, it was fantastic. So Nav's recommendation came through on that one, or on that.
That is high praise. I take this.
Hey, it's a great show. To be honest, I was expecting it to be more like heavy action, like sort of space combat stuff, and there's certainly some of that there. But I would say it's much more of a character-driven show than I was sort of expecting. And I would say the writing is quite good. The characters are compelling. I mean, I find them different levels of interesting, but I would say they're all at least, there's enough there for all of them to at least grab your attention. And yeah, I think the cast does a great job. I think the writing is good. The action went into there, I think, is also well done, and the way they approach like space and the physics of it, and from a more, quote unquote realistic, because I don't know exactly how it would all work, but seemingly more grounded approach when it comes to space combat and travel. I'm really into it. The one thing I'll say is that the season 6 it feels a little rushed, and I think maybe that it didn't get renewed, so they kind of said like you have to wrap it up this season, which is a little too bad, but overall, I think it's still a great watch, and I would highly recommend it. I think it's all really, really well done, really well executed. So,
got a question, Templar. Did you notice like the special effects jump from one season to another when Amazon got hold of it? I think it was season 3. That's when Amazon bought the rights.
Season 3 I think it got canceled after season 3 on Sci-Fi. And then season 4, it started on Amazon. There's certainly an increase in budget and production value went up. But honestly, I didn't think it was ever glaring. I mean, it's certainly not, we'll end up talking about the Lord of the Rings, which obviously they spent all the money on. But so it's not that kind of crazy production budget, but it wasn't a show where I'm watching it and I'm like, oof. It never took me out of it, even in the early seasons. But yeah, for sure, there's definitely a step up.
Awesome. And yeah, season 6, after season 5, they told them that season 6 was going to be the last season because they wanted to do 7 or 8 seasons. And so Amazon told them, but they knew that going into the writing. So that's, yeah. So at least they knew going into the season that this was going to be the last one. But there's a book series based off of this too.
There's also a Telltale game series based off of it.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, Telltale.
All right,
I would play that. But yeah, so that's largely. I mean, I watched that for the last week. That was good. Beyond that, what have I been playing? I mean, I started playing my PS5 again, and I was streaming from that because it's very easy to do. And shout out to everyone in the community. I was able to get affiliate from support of many people in the community. So thank you all for that. I would not have been able to do it without you all. So I've been playing more my PS5 again. I tried a bit of Returnal. That was okay. It's not really my thing, but it was okay. I played a game called Bring Us the Moon. Bring Us the Moon? Deliver Us the Moon. And that's because it's a smaller game. It's like more of a puzzle solving kind of atmospheric game where you go to a moon base to sort of rescue things. Mark watched some of it. And it's kind of a neat little game, and they're coming out with a sequel called Deliver Us Mars.
Oh, okay. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So that's why I kind of checked it out. And then I was playing a bit of Sifu on stream.
Yeah.
Which I was enjoying. I went through it. I do want to go back and then play through it on some of the higher difficulties as well to see the kind of get some more of the challenge, but I had a good time with it. And then I think that's about it. I feel like I was maybe playing something else, but
dang, dude,
that's enough.
You had a packed couple of weeks there.
Hey man, been busy. So yeah, it's good though.
Got to get that content in there. I want to say a couple of before I do my stuff. What's up to Cross Paladin jumping in the chat? Thanks for joining in. Welcome to Lux Digital Church. We're excited to get in this discussion as well. Saint Bear, dude. And Saint Bear also already pushing us over the edge about D&D and why Christians have played our apostate. So looking forward to that part of the discussion as well. And a number of other things happening in the chat. Bougie also giving Nav a shout out saying that he found the one media that Templar enjoys. I think that is incredibly appropriate. Yeah. So he took a bow. As for me, I have been on that D2 kick, that Destiny 2 kick as well. I have been playing and streaming video games with my youngest son, Carter, for a long time. We've been playing games since he was, 4, since he could hold a controller. But recently, over the last 3 or 4 months, we've been streaming together just on Tuesday and Thursday nights and some Fridays and some Saturdays, just whenever we can. He's really excited. I never put his face on camera, but I put his voice through like Xbox chat or like a Discord chat or something like that. St. Bear says Carter is OP in Destiny 2, and that is correct. Carter is, he's a 12-year-old kid, and I don't know how he does it, but it's insane. Bootstrap Boots, what's up? May or may not be packing a cart while watching this. That's awesome. So yeah, we've been streaming Destiny 2. It's been a ton of fun. I got bit by the bug hard when I started watching the Lightfall stuff, and then the new season dropped, and I've just been I can't tell you how, but it's one of those things. Like, I have been playing every time I can get my hands on a controller. So there's that. We're going to talk about Rings of Power. Spoiler, I actually liked the second episode. Did not like the first episode that much. Second episode, I did like a whole lot. It picked up big time there. And I don't know if you guys do what I do, but this goes way back to like when I was watching Lost live, like watching it week by week by week, because Lost was like such a cultural phenomenon. I would go to things like Vulture or like not even BuzzFeed, but some of those like nerd gaming or nerd sites that were writing blogs right after. And Vulture is the one I always kind of land on. And Vulture, Chino is terrible at D2. Josh, we had to Sherpa Josh through the third mission of the game because he kept dying last night. We're all like 15, 60, and 70, and Josh is still like a lowly 13 something. And not even 13. He's like a 12 something. And he kept we were just running, doing the thing that you do in Destiny on strikes or on missions where you just run. And we look back and Josh is nowhere to be found. It's like, Josh, where are you? Oh, sorry, guys. I got to catch up. And yeah,
I helped Josh through a bunch of the initial missions this morning on stream. Okay. So don't get too flamed by him.
Yeah, you're nice. He sucks at Destiny too. But anyway, so after the first 2 episodes of Rings of Power, I went to Vulture and I started reading through, and I was like, oh, some of this makes a whole lot more sense, and some of the stuff that they're doing. And again, we'll talk about it next episode, but there's a whole lot going on there that I can actually appreciate. I don't necessarily know that it's going to be as rousing a success as it should be in my head, but man, it's not bad. So there's Destiny 2, there's that. And then I had to spend all weekend in Ohio for a cousin's wedding. And I dislike Ohio with a fiery passion in my soul. And I have a lot of stories of we were only there for less than 48 hours. We left Tampa at 10 o'clock on a Saturday, and our flight left Monday morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, because we wanted to get the first flight out of there because it was just awful. The second we landed, it smelled like everything in Columbus smelled. Just smells mildly of paper mill. Everyone's real rude. People are trying to run you off the road all the time. I didn't eat Saturday morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon because I'm a kind of a nervous flyer. And I hate not having control. My wife's even worse than me. So I was trying to be all brave and all this. So I didn't eat because I didn't want anything in my stomach. We land. My dad picked me up and we're driving around Columbus, and I'm like, man, yeah, Dad, I'm hungry. Let's go stop somewhere. So we stop at a Panera. Now it's 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon at a Panera in Columbus, which is a college town. We roll up to this Panera. We go to open the door. It's locked. Why is it locked? Because it's closed. On a Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock, Panera is closed. Okay, cool. There's a Chipotle right around on the other side. I'm thinking cool, we'll go to the Chipotle. Walk around to the Chipotle, go to open the door. It's locked because it's closed, because it's 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. Why are you the way you are, Ohio? Fix it. Just fix your state. It's awful. There we go. Janny says she loves to fly. Baggy Man says Ohio is Pennsylvania's attic. I feel like Ohio is Pennsylvania's septic tank or sump pump.
Oh my God. If you're from Ohio, we love you. And we're so glad that you're here at our church today.
Mark loves you. I love you. I just don't love your state. Like, let's do that. I love you as a person. Look me in the eyes. Everybody from Ohio, look me in the eyes right now. I love you. Jesus loves you. Therefore, I have to love you. But I hate your state. In fact, I think it's worse than Florida. And I think Florida's pretty awful. So that being said,
Wow.
do something to fix it, okay? Your Wi-Fi speeds, awful. I had 5G apparently in Columbus, and I was getting less than 80 down and 10 up on my phone. Are you kidding me? 80 down and 10 up in 5G. What? What are you talking about? How does that even register as 5G? I'm done. Bougie, I got through a lot of triangle strategy. I got to chapter 4. I got to take a breath.
So I've been to the Air Force Museum in Ohio, and it's nice in Dayton. So just to say something nice about Ohio, I'm Canadian, so I don't really have any investment here in how Ohio is depicted, but the Air Force Aviation Museum in Dayton, Ohio is pretty sweet if you're into aviation history or military history or anything. It's free, and there's like 5 hangars full of planes all the way from like World War I all the way up to like the F-22 Raptor and like the B-2, or not a B-2, but B-1 bombers and like relatively new stuff. So it's pretty sweet if anyone's into that kind of stuff. So, hey, just hang on there. Hang on, Ohio. Hang in there.
I have nothing good to say about Ohio either.
Thank you for joining. And, here, and full disclosure, like I was born and raised in Michigan, and so we're taught, like we're bred to dislike the state down south. But like even still, it was an NFL Hall of Fame is in Ohio. I'm all about that. That's fine. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You know why they put all these halls of fame in there? Because there's nothing else in the state, and so they got to try to jazz it up. They got to do something. Also, when your claim to fame is Skyline Chili, a chili that would not even be served in as military rations, we have a problem. Okay. All right. We need to move on. I'm sorry.
Moving on.
Nav, I want to serve you up real quick before we move on. I need to shake out some of the anger here. So go ahead, Nav. The floor is yours.
One last thing I forgot to add about my week. On Monday, on Labor Day, day off, I got an email from Valve.
Oh, shut up.
That my Steam Deck was ready. Okay, so
let's go.
So anyway, it's getting prepared to ship. I keep checking the process, so it'll be here early next week. So I'm excited. But anyway, there you go. Good day.
Which version did you get? Did you get the 256 or the 512?
The mid.
Okay.
I didn't think I could put extra memory in, and also the screen glare protector that you can buy. It's not worth the extra money for that.
Anyway. Yeah, it's just an SD
in my
card,
opinion.
A micro SD, right, for the memory?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it still has 256 gigs. Pretty fast. What is it? The NVMe or something like yeah. So that's pretty good for what cool. I need. Yeah.
I'm very happy for you. I'm also very jealous of you. But jealousy is a sin, and so I'm just going to pray for you. And I'm going to praise the Lord for you. Also, real quick, can we have a quick discussion about flying? I see a couple of people saying in the chat that we can agree that flying is no fun. Anybody else here hate flying?
I don't love to fly.
Okay, Mark doesn't love
I'm
to
okay
fly.
with flying. I like flying, so.
When I lived up north on the reserve, we had to like fly in and out of the community. It was the only way in and out. So I took a fair bit of flights going back and forth. It was okay. I mean, I went on some smaller planes in and out of the community there that were not as much fun. But like the big planes you generally have, even for like regional flights, like bigger planes, that's fine. Like get on like a tiny plane that seats like 8 people and your stuff is literally like behind a net, like right behind you at the back. And like the entire ride you're like because of the turbulence.
Yeah, for those listening, on audio podcast, it basically turned into an Iron Maiden concert where Templar is just shaking all over the place.
Your head banging against your own will because of the turbulence you're dealing with. Like, that was slightly less fun. So, like, you know what? If you're on a bigger plane and you got a little few bumps here and there, suck it up. You're all fine.
Yeah, Nav is right. Atlanta is crazy. Also, the chat is blowing up. Alice in the Palace, good to have you here. And Houston is worse. I still think I maintain the Atlanta airport is just a disaster zone. It's 5 miles long and it's always under construction. And I don't know how anything gets done there.
Like one of the biggest airports in
it is the most traveled airport in the United States and second in the world behind the Singapore airport. It's insane. And and being there, I remember, because I used to live in Atlanta and I'd fly in and out of Atlanta, a decent amount of times a year. And inevitably I would land and it would be at the very furthest terminal of the entire airport. And one of the walkways would be shut down. And so I'd be walking, no joke, like 1.5 miles to get back to where I'm supposed to bag check or something. And then, you're trying to meet people or do whatever. Or if I was flying from Florida to Jersey or Florida to Michigan or Florida to wherever, layover in Atlanta, which is great. It's a 49 minute flight from Tampa to Atlanta. It's great. You get up to altitude and then you come back down. You don't even do anything. I love those flights. Like, give me all of that. Don't give me the 3 hours in the air where I'm bumping all over the place. I hate that crap. Instead, give me up, give me down. But then inevitably I'd have my connection flight would be on the other, I'd be land in terminal F and my connection would be in terminal A. And there's no way. That's probably why Trilith is being built there, says St. Bear. Absolutely. Yeah. So we got that going. Man, the chat is blowing up. Thanks everybody for landing in the chat. So we're going to transition a little bit into a topic that we have been wanting to talk about for a couple of weeks, and a topic that is actually very prescient to what we're doing here at Lux Digital Church. And that is the topic of Dungeons and Dragons. And really the question that comes up and has culturally come up in churches about Dungeons and Dragons, and that being, is it okay for a Christian to play or to engage with Dungeons and Dragons? Now, I think we do need to caveat some of this by saying we do have a Dungeons and Dragons ministry. As Mark said, it started last night, which, Mark, how did it go? If you want to give us a quick recap of all that.
It was great. Yeah, it was great. We had 11 people who played in 2 different games. I ran one. Grey Hood ran the other. Grey Hood's game went well. I almost killed Erkspan, but other than that, it went really well. Yeah, it went really good. So we had a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. I'm a fan of the fact that Lux is taking a swing like this. I do think it's not only is it gamer cultural appropriate, but it's also kind of just, it's in the zeitgeist right now because of Stranger Things, kind of still muddling about there a little bit. And let me bring out Joshu. That's fun. But we kind of want to take a step back and actually talk about what D&D is, first of all. Now, there's a lot of notions of what Dungeons and Dragons actually is. There's an actual historical component to Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s with Gary Gygax and Adam Gelman. I can never pronounce his last name. 2 guys who created a system of telling role-playing fantasy stories using dice, using pencils and paper and all sorts of stuff. What is your guys' personal history with D&D? I know Nav had said he doesn't have an extensive history with it, but let's start with you, Templar. Like, what is your kind of association or history with it?
My history with it?
Yeah, your experience.
Not a lot. I only got into it in the last couple of years in terms of playing it. When I was younger, maybe 16 to 18, something like that, my cousin Scott, who's he might be 50 now, but he's a couple decades older than me. I spent a lot of time with him at my family cottage, and he's played D&D for like 30, 35 years. Much of that with the same group. So when I was young, he used to always tell me about it. And I found it very interesting because I've been into fantasy storytelling for a long time. So we'd go out fishing or whatever, and we'd talk for hours about the characters he was playing and the stories he was getting into. And he was in a campaign where they always kind of built their own worlds and they would spend like months or like a year building their whole scenario, and people would take turns DMing and stuff like that. And it sounded great. And I remember he lent me a book to look over so I could really create a character and like learn a little bit about it. Then my dad found it and was not having it. Went off on me about how I like shouldn't be playing D&D, how it was evil, how he didn't want me getting into that, like how my cousin was being a bad influence on me because of that, like that type of thing. And so I was young, teenager. And so I never did get into it. I never had anyone else to really talk to about it. I never knew anyone else that played it. And then actually starting to play it was just the last couple of years, like through Legends Cast with Mark and Gibby and DBN. I started playing with those guys. I guess it would be a couple of years ago now, maybe year and a half ago, playing a couple one shots here and there of different things. Tales from the Loop, Blades in the Dark.
That was it.
Yeah, Blades in the Dark. And then playing in a Runeterra. We played a bit in a Runeterra setting, right, for D&D.
Yep.
And that was my first exposure to it, and I loved it. It was great. Had a lot of fun. Of course, I mean, it was nice being able to get into it with Gibby and DBN and Mark, just because they're all kind of experienced players and they were able to help me out and that sort of thing. But I mean, I think even if it wasn't that group, I still think I would have had a great time with it. Like I really enjoy the role-playing aspect and the complexity of it and the passion people have for it. So yeah, that's been my experience. And then we played in that group for a while, and then now we're just starting up with Lux, and we played for the first time yesterday with a new group, and it's a great time.
Yeah. Real quick, Bootstrap Boots in the chat says, I got into it because a friend and I got bored with current role-playing games available and love that we get out of it what we put into it. That's a great way of saying that, by the way. Being able to do anything with it. My mom was the same. It's evil, and it can take you down an evil path. We're going to talk about that in just roll to you.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah. We'll talk about that and the straw man argument that goes with that as well. Nav, let's roll to you. What is your experience and kind of your background and history with D&D?
Well, the church I grew up in, just to give it background, I think I've talked about this before. Like I had a lot of friends that were allowed to play Pokemon, like when it was popular, because anything that was popular was probably evil. Oh. It was kind of like one of those things, like, it's like, if the world thinks it's popular, it must be evil. So
like
it was like
rock music.
Yeah, everything like that. Okay. But the thing is, I was allowed to play Pokemon, so my friends gave me money and I bought Pokemon cards for them and gave them to them. So I was like the church's underground Pokemon card dealer. Yes. Nice. They would meet me at my car after church and I was selling them Pokemon cards.
This is sinful.
Yes. And so I was like 12 years old. I mean, come on. Anyway. But yeah, with D&D, to get back on track, I was never like our church. I guess my friend group, we never played it because it was kind of frowned upon, but my cousins played it. And I played it once when I was 12. One of the first time I remember playing D&D. I didn't know what I was playing, but I played it. Then a couple years later, I realized like, we were playing D&D. That's because it was this whole story. We were in a dungeon, Dungeons and Dragons. There was monsters, all this stuff, rolling dice, all that stuff, playing at my cousin's house. And I thought it was just like a fun game that she made up. No, it was actually D&D. And so anyway, that was my older cousin. She introduced me to it. And I played it a couple times since then, but I really haven't had like a friend group that's really into it, like locally wise. But I have a lot of students that in my youth group that they get together. Well, they've graduated now, but they still get together and play D&D and stuff like that. And they told me I could join anytime, but I need to sometime. But that's why I never frowned upon it from students playing. They always talked about it, and it was a great talking point with them and stuff like that. I have my family in Florida, my extended family. A lot of my brother-in-laws and sisters-in-laws, they all get together and play it. It's hilarious. Cool. My family in Florida. And so I have a brother-in-law. He's like, dude, if you want any campaigns, I can hook you up. So he's like, I got stuff for you.
That's cool.
So I might have to get into it soon. But anyway, but that's my extent. Not too much. I played it, like I said, a couple times, but nothing too crazy. I played like D&D light, like board games, basically, that were just like you can finish in a couple hours. Yeah, stuff like that. And I really enjoyed those a lot. So I've played plenty of those, and I do like it. And I would like to do more of it. And yeah. So there you go.
Sweet. Yeah, I started actually playing Hero Quest when my parents got it for me when I was 5th grade. I don't know if you remember Hero Quest, but it was like it was a board, and it basically it was just a big, it looked like a dungeon, just big cutout, huge like mat thing. And then you could put down doors and walls and all sorts of stuff. And so essentially you had a DM that was creating stuff, and then you had like 4 characters like Gauntlet, and it was super cool. And that's how I kind of started with D&D. And then when I got into high school, I was a band nerd. I was in marching band and with band nerds and video game nerds, and I was also playing hockey at the time, and so I had like a weird cross section of friends. And we actually, one of those band nerds and one of the hockey friends, we started playing together, and there's the puppy. And we started playing D&D together, and then that actually transitioned into college. I was doing a lot of drugs in college, a lot of bad things in college, but one of the drug group friends I was a DM for, and so I would DM for them, and they would give me drugs. So it was like a really cool sort of like thing. And then I got saved, and all my, kicked the addiction stuff, and then started actually DMing for some friends and kind of doing all that other stuff. And then I kind of had a running group that we played online and in person and all this other stuff for years now. But 3 years ago, my kids came to me and said, hey, we heard about Dungeons and Dragons. Would you DM a campaign for us? And as a dad, it was like, oh my gosh. So I DM'd a campaign for them. It didn't really stick. Like, they still ask me about it occasionally, and we'll still do like one shots and stuff. But by and large, it's just been kind of this ongoing thing in the background. And Mark, I'm sure it's kind of the same with you. I'd love to hear your history with it and kind of your experience with the entire role-playing genre.
Sure. Yeah. So I got introduced to Dungeons and Dragons in the 3.0 system. My cousin Chip introduced it to me at my grandmother's house, and I came home, told my buddy Joe about it, which I talked about this last weekend. And Joe had the player's handbook sitting at home, but he had no idea what it was. And so we pulled it out and we started playing, and we introduced a couple of friends to it. And I have been playing with Joe in some capacity, D&D, or people from that friend group, for 22 years.
Wow.
And so I have been playing TTRPGs, tabletop RPGs, weekly, normally weekly, not always, but typically weekly or bi-weekly for 22 years. And so I've played not all of them, but I've played a tremendous number of them. We played Dungeons & Dragons 3.0, Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, 4.0. We branched out from there and started playing a wide variety of different things because we did not like 4.0. So played a hyper-realistic, super crunchy, very intense TTRPG called Burning Wheel, which is known for being one of the most hyper-realistic and brutal RPGs ever made. We played that for about 5 or 7 years. Then we've played Blades in the Dark, Things from the Loop, Tales from the Flood, Scum and Villainy, Fate, Savage Worlds. You know what, you name it. We've played RPGs that use dice, D6 systems, D10 systems, percent dice systems, D20 systems. We've played RPGs that are strictly storytelling and just use chips, and you don't roll any dice at all. And so, yeah, I've been honestly, outside of Jesus, the thing that has been most consistent in my life, other than some relationships, has been D&D. Like, in terms of things that I participate in, church. And right next to that thing is tabletop RPGs. So have been playing them for a really, really long time. Interestingly enough, my mother had kind of a similar thought. Like, what if, okay, yeah, Dungeons & Dragons is the gateway drug to deeper drugs. And that deeper drug is Satanism, right? And so I mean, and that's really how Dungeons & Dragons was portrayed in her generation. It's how she understood it. But what the approach that my mother took, and I really deeply, deeply appreciate, because it enabled me to play D&D and explore that. And obviously I'm not a Satanist, right? One of the things that she said was just like, well, listen, I know what he's doing, and he's not doing drugs. Now, evidently, Chino Mage, that wasn't the case for all of our moms, but it was the case for mine. And she's like, he's pretending to be an elf at his buddy's house. He's pretending to be a dwarf, like he's a nerd. I literally can't get a girlfriend. So I'm not worried about it. Like, he's not getting anybody pregnant. He's not doing drugs. He's not getting any significant trouble. Like, he's pretending to be a Lord of the Rings character with his friends. And I think she really took that as been like, there's worse things that he could be into. So like this, let's let him do this thing. And honestly, my friendships that I forged in D&D and tabletop games have been the longest friendships of my life. Some of the deepest bonds of my life, some of the most iconic moments, and some of the most vivid stories of my life have happened around the table. And so, yeah, D&D and RPGs in general, tabletop RPGs in general are a big part of me.
Okay. So we have established then that us nerds, particularly us four, and then a number of people in the chat right now, don't necessarily have issues with D&D. We have kind of squared it with our faith and kind of our belief in Jesus and us as Christians. What are some of the common objections you guys hear? However, we've talked about what's going to lead to Satanism. It's the slippery slope. But like, what are those specific things that you guys hear in conversation about D&D and Christianity?
I don't know. I kind of think like some people don't even know what D&D stands for, so they think it's like demons and dragons or something like that. It's like what was it? It was Tim Hawkins. He's a Christian comedian. Like about what AC/DC was like anti-Christian devil. What was it?
Yeah.
Devil community or something like that. It was like something like the acronym. I heard like a Christian. It was kind of funny how like Christians will just come up with stuff like that. But it was always like, to me, it's like, oh, it's cult like. That's what I heard too. Like Dungeons & Dragons, you're going to group together people. It's like a cult. There's like the books you're reading to do this, like have real magic spells in them. Like, I'm like, real magic spell? Like, I've heard this stuff, like all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, when you say it now, it sounds really funny. But like when you're back then, it was like, oh, there's actually like, witchcraft in here and stuff like this. I'm like, but you're letting me read Chronicles of Narnia right now. But anyway, or go see a play of Chronicles of Narnia where they're pretending magic is happening on stage and all this other stuff. Anyway, but I think it's kind of funny. I'm like, that's kind of like what D&D is. But anyway, but yeah, so I'll stop there because I don't want to take too much time. But like, that's what it is. It's like, it's cultish. There's like real witchcraft in it. There's like, that's what I heard growing up about like D&D, like what it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was started by Satanists.
Absolutely. Yeah. Devils and Demons, says Bougie in the chat. And Raging Bananas, good to have you here. Appreciate you being here. St. Bear also brings up one of the things I wanted to talk about, the parallels with Lord of the Rings, and Narnia is a great one. Templar Lift, what are some of the other objections you guys hear when we're talking about D&D?
I think that a lot of the church's issue with Dungeons & Dragons has had, and this is not necessarily their objection, but it has a lot to do with a lack of understanding. And it also has to do, I think, with historically, like one or two very passionate, outspoken pastors who had a decent amount of influence.
Like who?
Name
them right now.
I legitimately don't even know their name.
I'm kidding.
I don't even know. But what's interesting is a good friend of mine, a dead broke nerd, who DBN, who we played D&D with, me, him, and Templar. He's one of the guys I podcast with. He's a history major, and his final project in history was the history of the demonization of Dungeons & Dragons, and the narrative and why the narrative from the church was crafted around Dungeons and Dragons. And there is a book, or there's a movie out now, documentary called The Satanic Panic, that Checkpoint Church put out. Not they didn't put out, but they showed it. And then if you're looking for more, Love Thy Nerd has a site as well that goes over a deep explanation of what Dungeons and Dragons is and some of its connections to those roots. So I think one of the number one things is like, I think it just made Christians very uncomfortable. Like the people who are, and I think it's because the people who are typically attracted to sort of these fantasy worlds are people that made the church uncomfortable. They just didn't fit what we would. I mean, you have a very strong stereotype when you think of Dungeons and Dragons players, right? Like I think of my brother-in-law, who had no reference board at all. I took him into the board game shop one time. There was a Magic the Gathering tournament going on. And from that day on, for him, Magic the Gathering is represented by men who are wearing clothes that are too small for their bodies, in sweatpants, sitting in lawn chairs indoors drinking Capri Suns. Like, that's just what he thinks of when he thinks of the game Magic the Gathering, because that's what he experienced. And to be fair, that's exactly what he saw, right? And so I think a lot of Dungeons and Dragons became pretty intimately connected to some of the metal scene, some of the hard rock scene, and some of the things that it became associated with people who were breaking out of what would have been typically social norms during the time, found themselves attracted to Dungeons and Dragons because it was outside of the social norm. And so really what I think the complaint that I've heard the most is like, we don't understand it. And I heard that it's evil. Like, I haven't looked into it. I haven't read it myself. I really don't know anything about it, but it's one of those things that you shouldn't do because it's connected to witchcraft. And to be fair, you know, the Wiccan cult and witchcraft is a very real thing in our world. And there are some comparisons, and there are probably a lot of people who are actually literally in cults that are also attracted to Dungeons and Dragons. So I think one of the hard parts is there actually is some truth to the claims. But just like money can be used for good or evil, and just like many things, video games can be used for good or evil, just like Discord can be used for good or for evil. Dungeons and Dragons, in my, you know, it's very similar. So I think we'll get into some of that conversation.
Yeah, totally. Templar. Oh, go ahead, Nav.
Okay, Templar, you can go, then you can come back to me. And so I just have something to add in there about, but go ahead, Templar. If you have anything to add.
I don't know if I have a lot to add. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to people being relatively uninformed, and just being scared of what the intention with something was when it was created, and what the ultimate impact of that could be. And I equate it to something like yoga, in that, like, lots of people do yoga. And yoga, you know, people view it as a good exercise, but yoga has its sort of roots in Hindu religious practices, right? And religious beliefs. So I've heard people debate whether it's okay for Christians to do yoga because it's like, well, it's rooted in a different religious practice. So does that matter? And then, well, are you accepting that practice by doing it is just going through the motions of it or actions of it enough to sort of tie you into that other belief system? And I say that only because I think people don't really know how D&D maybe started or what the intention was behind it, and don't really know if there was any kind of, you know, whatever, cult influence or Wiccan or, you know, some sort of satanic influence in the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. And I think people also view it more harshly when you're actively acting something out rather than you're just reading something. But you even saw it with like Harry Potter, that people were objecting to certain, like, children reading Harry Potter because they didn't want them being exposed to witchcraft and various, like, those types of various ideas. So then when you add the additional layer that you are actually participating in it and acting it out, I think that concerns people more, that you're going to somehow become connected with whatever the real world versions of these things might be. So I think it's a couple aspects there. One, not knowing where it came from, not understanding why people do it, or maybe the motivation for people doing it, and then not knowing how it connects to the real world sort of realities of those sorts of things and how that is distinct from it. So, you know, that's kind of how I view it.
Gotcha. Nav, go ahead.
Yeah. I think I know you're going to go into this, Chino, in a second, how it started and stuff, but I think really what gave D&D a bad name was the period we call the Satanic Panic in the 80s, the late 70s, 80s. I'll have to post in the Discord. It's a secular podcast, or I guess non-Christian podcast, that actually kind of goes into the history of the Satanic Panic and with the evangelical tie-ins and everything else. And it's actually very good. It's historical. It's just facts. And it's actually gives you a good, it's like a 2-part series, 2 hours long, but they go into how it started. And the D&D is mentioned in this too, which is, I find very fascinating. But I think also what gave it a bad name was, have you guys ever heard of Focus on the Family? It's a conservative radio program. Yeah. James Dobson is one of the guys. And he started this a radio show called Adventures in Odyssey, which I think is kind of funny because it's very much D&D like in some ways. But anyway, and I listened to that a lot as a kid because I came up from that very conservative evangelical circle. But there was actually 2 episodes in that Adventures in Odyssey series that spoke about the dangers of D&D. Mm-hmm. Even though Adventures in Odyssey was like basically almost like D&D is. Anyway, but you have to listen to it. But it warned the dangers of magic and mysticism, and also how it talks about. And then he also speaks about, this is him. He spoke about how previous players of the game allegedly came into contact with demons and Satanists. I'm like, but like we talked about, you can take anything and turn it into evil. Also, you can take anything and make it into worse. Anyway, so I don't mean to attack him. James Dobson's done a lot of great things, but also I know I've seen this shot here too. So I don't mean, I'm just saying, I'm just reading right here, like an article I had pulled up. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I grew up in that whole thing, listened to that radio show a lot and stuff like that. And I mean, I'll be honest, I have some issues with it. Focus on the Family, but that's a different story for a different time. And I'm not going to get into that.
Oh, totally. You know, there's a whole lot going on in the chat. First off, I want to say hello to Jam Blam. Thanks for joining in here at Lux. We're having a conversation about D&D, and go ahead.
I was just going to say, what is so interesting is I worked for a church for 11 years. The worship pastor and I left within 6 months of each other. The worship pastor lives in Colorado Springs, and he is the social media director for Focus on the Family. And really? I am leading a church, and I am literally leading a church that has started a Dungeons and Dragons ministry. So I just think that is, it's just utterly hilarious to me that, you know, and we are theologically, we're very similar. We're like, I'm super good friends with him. He's like my brother, right? And it's just so funny to me, the different worlds that we're in because of that. Yeah.
So Nav, do you want to put him on blast, or are you okay? Like,
I'm not gonna put him on. No.
He hates the stuff he has to put on social media.
Okay, good. Yeah, he eats it up there because he feels like somebody has to.
Job.
Yeah, I get being paid there.
I don't like speaking bad at people, but I do have issues with some of the stuff. Like I am scarred from my childhood. Okay, I have scars.
No, totally. And Hunter Fam jumps in and says, "Don't laugh at me. As a mom, I need something to tell me how many cuss words in a Marvel movie so I can decide if the kids need to watch it on Clear Play or regular." And that's absolutely, like, Focus on a Family. They have carved out a niche for that. And I will say I have gone there in the same aspect for things with my younger children when, you know, I don't have time to watch something or preview something when they were younger. Absolutely. I think it's great with that. There's no laughing. We're being very welcoming here. Nav has some.
What's Clear Play?
Clear Play is it's like, I think it's called Angel something or other now, but basically it's like the Walmart version when Walmart used to edit out like Puff Daddy and Notorious B.I.G. albums. Like, it would just censor a lot of the things that it needed to. So it's I can't remember if it's free or you have to actually pay for it. Maybe Hunter Fam can jump in the chat there. Keep all the stuff going in the chat, by the way. This is a fascinating discussion that's going on around this right now. So
I would just avoid Marvel movies in general, Hunter Fam, because they're all trash now anyway. So like,
let's go to Templar for your reviews. He'll just tell you, like, no,
expose your children to such a low level quality content anyway. So like, the fact that they might be subjected to language is just like more on top of the pile of reasons not to watch Marvel movies.
We're going to start Focus on the Templar.com, and then you could just go there and it's just going to be thumbs down for pretty much everything except like The Expanse or, you know, Hell Let Loose or something.
And like, I don't know, The Dark Knight. And
exactly.
A couple movies and TV shows.
It's just going to be a picture of Templar doing this, like that dude from the GIF from the baseball game. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and Bougie's right. Hunter fam, kudos to you. A lot of parents just let their children do whatever. That's absolutely right. Okay, so we've kind of gotten through our own personal histories and kind of some of the objections that we talk about with D&D. One that I kept coming back to that I have heard before is that it's forcing people to choose between fantasy and reality, thereby blurring, it's something that blurs the lines between people who you're like, oh, you're not living in reality anymore. Jesus wants us to live in reality. It's like, yes, absolutely. But that's also denying the use of imagination. And, there's a lot of things that you can bring up from biblical concepts that, even King David, he was using his imagination. So where's the line between David, who probably had never seen snow, talking about snow on mountaintops, or if he had, like it was very rare, and, things that are happening in the book of Revelation, like, is that imagination? Is that vision? There's a whole weird thing that you can walk down right there. Let's go to then some things that D&D could be good for, because I do think there are some merits to Dungeons and Dragons that if we are going to know what we're for as Christians, we also need to know the good things that come. We don't just need to know the objections. We also need to know how to sustain and maintain those objections. So with you guys kind of thinking about this a little bit, like, what's some of the good that can come from playing D&D?
I'll jump in. I think it's also, I'm just experiencing with teenagers who play it. So I'm just saying it's actually honestly unifies some of our youth groups, some of the guys getting together, inviting some guys in who normally wouldn't like hang out, whatever. It's like, hey, come play a game with us. They explained it. Anyway, it was just kind of cool. Like guys getting together that like, from guys who play sports or whatever, or only play Call of Duty, but playing Dungeons and Dragons now and stuff like that. And what's really cool is my two brothers with two other, basically there's like 6 or 8 guys that still get together and do this. And they're all kind of a little bit different, but they'll get together, play either video games or do Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering. But really it was like kind of like D&D that kind of like brought this group, and even though they're all graduating now and stuff, they still get together and do things, but it kind of like, brought these different groups of people together. And I think it can unify and it can bring discussion about good things, morality and stuff like that. Morality, sin, everything. You can actually put a lot into D&D and talk about that. But anyway.
Cool. Templar.
Yeah, I think
Mark. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, you chose Templar. We're going Templar next.
No, I was gonna alternate between you two, Templar or Mark. That's what I was gonna do.
Go for it, man. You got more experience with D&D than I do.
I think that one of the things that happens in D&D, and there are a lot of things that are positive, like, and at the same time, I think we need to be honest. Like, it's a hobby, right? Like, you could just as easily say, what are some of the positive sides of riding a motorcycle? And there are negative sides, and you could also end up in a motorcycle gang if you decided that's what you wanted to do, right? Like, but you're not going to accidentally sign up for the Outlaws. Like, you're not going to be like, I don't even know what happened, bro. Like, I got a motorcycle and now I'm in the Outlaws. And it's like, I just
Chino's
woke up and it happened.
We
Right?
need to have a deluxe movie night where we watch the Tim Allen motorcycle gang movie that he did. What was it called?
Oh my
Wild
goodness.
Hogs.
Yeah, Wild Hogs.
Oh,
yeah.
my goodness.
Wild
Yes,
Hogs.
there
We
we
need to
go.
have a Lux movie night where we watch that.
Oh.
A cautionary
it's
tale
like-
of accidentally getting in with the wrong crowd.
So, I mean, I'm going to continue just running this analogy into the ground. So in the same, let me just put it this way. So I have, there's legitimate motorcycle gangs in my area of the world, like legitimate. The Outlaws and the Pagans run my section of the country, and they frequently do have conflicts with one another because they're running drugs and they're running humans like through our area of the world. So like this is it's like a very real thing. However, I also have friends who are in a motorcycle club called the Remnant Sons, a friend of mine who's the president of the local chapter, a friend of mine who's the chaplain of the local chapter, a friend of mine who's a pledger to the local chapter. And their camaraderie and deep connection, because they ride and love motorcycles, they do that together. There's this insanely deep connection. So can Dungeons and Dragons be used negatively in a group? It certainly can, but there's also a deep connection that develops and very deep relationships that develops through sitting down at the table together. And there's other benefits in terms of like keeping your imagination alive. And it enables you to play, at times really heroic characters. It does put you in situations where you're stuck in moral dilemmas where you have to make decisions, and sometimes you're conflicted because the decision the character that you're playing would make might be different than the decision that you would make, and that would go back and forth. So there's so many things. I played my first D&D game ever last night. For me, it allows people to connect. It allows through a fantasy world for people to come together and accomplish things. It cultivates critical thinking. I'm going to go find it. Critical thinking, camaraderie, connection, teamwork, and also allows intentionally safe space for people to come be themselves as well. And Rip, very first time he played last night, obviously picked up on all of those things. And that's awesome. My feelings about Dungeons and Dragons is could there be bad things about the same things I'm talking about? Absolutely. But there is this very deep connection that's developed that you make with people. And that, honestly, that is there's two reasons that Lux has a Dungeons and Dragons outreach. One is the church has chastised and expelled people who play Dungeons and Dragons. So there are people who will be at the table multiple times a week to play, but will never go to a church. And I'm just not okay with those people going to hell. Like, that's not okay with me. And I'm not just going to sit around in my brick and mortar building and just be like, you make me uncomfortable. So like, I'm just not okay. I'm not okay with that mentality about life anymore. That's one. Number two is I know the bonds that I've built over D&D, and I know that, to be honest with you, the bonds that I built over D&D are deeper than almost any bonds I have ever built in the church, with the exception of a couple of small groups. And so I am closer to the people I play D&D with than the people that I went to church with every Sunday for 13 years. And that's meaningful to me, which tells me there is something in community development that Dungeons and Dragons has identified that the church does not. And we are closer to the biblical concept of unity, sometimes with my D&D group, than I have been with a church. And so I'm like, well, what is it? It's inside of D&D that unlocks our ability to deeply, deeply connect with one another in such a way that there's a brotherhood or a sisterhood or there's just something that happens there. And so that's one of the things, as the pastor of Lux, that I'm saying, I want to see if D&D unlocks some of this stuff inside of our church. Like, what does it look like for people who are on spiritual journey together also bind to one another because of the stories they're telling around the table?
Mark,
and in our case, the digital table.
When the initial idea for the D&D ministry came about, were there ever any thoughts in your head to, I'm going to have to combat any criticism, or was it just full steam ahead? We don't really care. I don't really want to listen to any of this.
Yeah, like when you decide that you're going to plant an entirely online church during the pandemic in a rural community that thinks everyone who's not going to church physically has bowed a knee to the president and worships him and him alone. Like when you hear things flung at your church, like, well, you're just worshiping Caesar. And then you plant a digital church, like those things increase. And so at some point or another, you just have to decide that you're going to move with the movers, and you're going to stick with the people who are in your corner, and you just can't listen to it. So have I received a lot of criticism for it? No, I've had some people from our church ask genuine questions, which is way different than criticism, who've come to me and said, I'm actually worried about this because this is what I've heard about it. Why are we doing this? And I've been able to respond to those questions and explain to them why people inside of Dungeons and Dragons communities matter to Jesus. And that's why we're using it. That's why we're doing it. At the same time, I just don't care. I just don't care. Like you have no experience with it. It doesn't, none of that stuff has ever mattered to me. Like anybody who's ever blazed any trails has done it amidst criticism. And so that just comes with the territory, like, to be honest with you. But that comes with the territory and everything that I've been doing for the last 2 years, it doesn't just come with the territory of Dungeons and Dragons. So that's not new. If the church wants to criticize me over something, it will criticize me over things before D&D.
Yeah. So Cross Paladin and St. Bear in the chat are throwing quotes back and forth that are long and awesome from Marcus Pittman and from St. Augustine, and a whole lot of stuff going on there. And I super encourage a lot of you to go back and watch the VOD of this. If you are watching this on demand, go back and read some of those quotes. I can't put them up on the screen because they're long and they look super ugly when I put them up. But Bougie chimes in and asks, so what would you guys say to a parent who shares these concerns and their child is interested in playing? That's a great question. Like where, and I'm going to turn that question a little bit, and I'm going to ask Templar, we're kind of at the point where we're making the case for, yes, it is okay for Christians to play D&D, but there is a line. And I'm going to start with you, Templar, like where is the line for you? Well, we have talked in broad strokes about, it could lead. So let's go back to the motorcycle analogy that I about lost my hat on. But, I'm not going to buy a motorcycle and then the next day slip and fall into a motorcycle gang. Like there's a line there that I have to walk between, man, I'm in a crew versus I'm in a gang. So where's the line for Christians playing D&D?
I think that will be different for each person, but in terms of, like, as you said there, the broad strokes of it, I think various people are susceptible to things to varying degrees, and that might be kind of a vague way of putting it. But essentially what I mean is this. So for me, I went through a phase in my life where I collected whiskey. I basically bought a lot of different types of whiskey. I have a whiskey collection in my house. That's not a problem for me in terms of temptation, in terms of like being at risk of like going and downing a whole bottle. That's not a struggle that I personally have. For some people, that would be a struggle for them, and they wouldn't be able to have those things in their home because they know it's something where they might fall, right? So I think for most people, it would become a problem where how much time are you devoting to it? Like anything, right? How much of your life, what percentage of your life is this taking up? Are you ignoring responsibilities that you have to work, maybe to church, to family, to friends in your pursuit of this? It's fine to say the benefits of exploring a fictional world and getting into that. I totally agree. I think there can be a point where it doesn't necessarily become your reality, but too much of your own reality is being ignored for your efforts in a fantasy world. And I think so for generally, that would be the broadest issue, I would say. Not necessarily just for Christians, for anyone. How much of your time is it taking up? Now, then more specifically for Christians, I think now we get to this idea of like alcohol for me isn't really an issue. There are going to be people who might be more susceptible to falling into like potential practices or potentially getting involved with, real world things that kind of connect to some of these darker elements, like these things that actually exist. I think it's somewhat unlikely. And I think you really have to probably go out of your way more to find those sorts of things, but gauge your own comfort level and your own ability to get into it. Right. So, for me, if I'm playing a game and, it's one of Mark's games, so there's certainly going to be a cult somewhere. So talking about cults, talking about dark practices, talking about like sacrifices, talking about whatever, right? That stuff doesn't upset me, but potentially that is stuff that you aren't comfortable with. Like I don't watch supernatural horror movies because the content I find hits me differently and upsets me in a way that I don't particularly like. So someone could find the same thing with D&D. So maybe you need to pursue games that have less of a supernatural or less of a horror themed element to them. And then beyond that, are you susceptible to it? How comfortable do you feel with it? But I think if you find a good group and you have a solid group of people that you're playing with, and you're not allowing it to take over too much of your time, I think you can generally be comfortable pursuing it. It was maybe a bit rambling, but hopefully I got to something.
No, that was helpful.
Yeah, no, you hit the alcohol thing. I was actually going to get to as well. It's the old stumbling block idea. And I think that's quite awesome. Janny had popped into the chat and said to Bougie, asked them if they've ever watched a soap opera. Did they go out and commit adultery because of it? That's good. That's the slippery slope mentality. St. Bear, though, I did love his comment and say, like any RPG, the risk is who you're playing with and what you choose to do. I had a group of friends who every time we'd play D&D, they'd drive the story to brothels and just the most horrendous stuff they could imagine. I had to decide that wasn't a campaign I wanted to stay in, but that's not D&D's fault. And that's absolutely, like, I think that's a winning argument and a winning thought there. And then Lady Iju, as a parent, monitor who your kids are playing it with. Be sure the DM is not running a campaign that's objectionable or doing wrong. Yes, and which is why all parents should know how to DM. There you go. Go buy the Dungeons Master's Guide. The DMG's $30. Go buy one. DM a campaign. Lift. Like, what would you guys? Hey, Rip, good to see you. Thanks for joining in. Welcome to Lux. Glad you're here. What would you guys say? Like, what is the line for you guys, or what's the line that you would try to quote unquote prescribe to others that are asking you that question?
If it was like parents, I was like, well, know who their friends are. I think it's already been said in chat. Know who the friends are. Know what material is being used. Review it, monitor it. Just like a parent should do. Anyway, and so. As someone who doesn't have kids, I'm like, sometimes I talk to parents about their kids. I'm like, well, if you just kind of like, anyway, it's kind of funny.
Talk to your children.
Talk to your children, find out what they're doing, anyway. But yeah, it's kind of like the whole thing with like social media. Can your kids have social media? It's like, well, that depends on how your kids are, maturity level. What kind of accountability is with it? Like, do you have access to their accounts and everything so you can check their DMs and all that stuff, make sure. And there's plenty of things to do. So that's, I kind of take the same approach with D&D for parents wise, like know who the friends are, where they're going, where they're meeting. It's the basic stuff. Okay. Play with your kids, have them, stuff like that. Be interested in things they're interested in. As for someone, if it's just a random Christian is like, hey, I think D&D is wrong. I'm like, I would ask them, like, explain to me why D&D is wrong. If they say it's so demonic and everything, then I would just start using parallels of like, have you read Chronicles of Narnia? Have you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Have you, there's other fantasy stuff that I could say that I know Christians are into. I'm like, and I would put the question back, you explain to me what's the difference. And I'm not trying to be combative or anything, but I want them to explain it to me. Like, you have to put it in your way. If you believe that, then you should know how to defend it. And if it's not adequate enough, I'm like, because I will just be like, okay, biblically, where's it wrong? Because like, if it's not morals, like one of the guys said, it was like, where his friends are playing, where it was like about brothels and stuff like that. It's like, okay, yeah, morality stuff right there. You got to draw a line on this. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but if it's like good triumphing over evil and stuff like this, and it's part of the story, I'm like, we all have stories. Life is not perfect, and I'm okay with making a campaign that's more realistic in life and everything. But anyway, don't know if that answered the question, but that's just like a little bit. I would just have them explain to me why you think it's evil. Then I would go there with the person, but have them explain, have them defend their point. Instead of me defending it, have them defend why they think it's evil. Because a lot of times people will just say things because they heard it from someone else and regurgitate something. And it's like, I heard this on the radio, or I heard this in this podcast, or I read this in this book, and they really don't know how to defend it. They're just copy pasta, basically. Copy and like pasta. Going with
Awesome. Mark, anything to add to that?
I would just say this: if you're dealing with like your kids, like keep in mind that nothing happens in Dungeons and Dragons that doesn't come out of you. Like, for the most part, largely. So keeping that in mind, you also have to keep in mind the simple fact that like the bonds that people create at the table are deep. And so the larger danger is not them playing Dungeons and Dragons. The larger danger is who are they forming those bonds with? And you should be intentional about knowing who your children are forming those bonds with, and trusting your children to form bonds with people who are going to build them up. Beyond that, if it's wrong for you, it's wrong for you. Listen, I'm running a campaign right now with two buddies, neither of which are believers. They are literally starting a cult of Vecna right? Like that is actually what's happening in game. I'm intentionally running that game for them. It's not a stumbling block for me. It's not a stumbling block for them. We have a very clear indication of what is fantasy and what is reality, and any of us have any problem with that. That being said, I have another friend who was in a satanic cult. He's had spiritual visits by demons. He knows what that looks like. Anything that looks even like he bought Betrayal at House on the Hill, and he said, I can't deal with this. This game is too much for me because it's been too real to me, right? And so it was sin for him. And he actually gave that board game over. And that's light in comparison to what some of the things that you may experience in Dungeons & Dragons. It's like, it's a storytelling. It's a little bit of like a role-playing game in Betrayal. And so like keeping that in mind, like what is wrong for you? If it's wrong for you and it's not wrong for me, that there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like it can be wrong for you. That's okay. You can not participate in it. That is fine. But keeping in mind, this isn't a biblical truth matter. This is a Christian liberties matter. And so this is a question of, I don't want to cause and do things for you to stumble, but I do want to do things that are short of sin to reach people who don't know Jesus. And so, it's important to me as the pastor of Lux that we are actually attuned to nerd culture and we care about nerds and we care about the things that nerds care about. So, if it's wrong for you, it's wrong for you. And that's okay. I'm not going to judge you for that. No one's going to judge you for that. We're not going to dislike you for that. I'm just saying that for us, like those of us who feel like it's safe to participate in, we're going to continue to play because we don't, there's no sin issue that's cropping up in our lives, nothing that's becoming developed out of that. And so, and then, obviously, like the same exact things that you would look for signs for in anything, the same signs you would look for if you're completely obsessed with a video game. If you go to sleep thinking about it, if you wake up thinking about it, if you orient your life around it, Dungeons & Dragons can be an addiction, just like anything else can be very addictive. And so, like, keep things in check. Make sure Jesus is at the top of your life. Make sure he's first in your life. Make sure the kingdom is more important. Your relationships are more important. D&D is fun. It's a hobby. Enjoy it. Don't make your life about it.
I think that's a mic drop moment right there. Yeah.
Well said.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're gonna round the corner here to wrap up a little bit. If Bougie is still in the chat, Bougie asked a question back in our Discord server, discord.gg/Lux Digital Church for all those joining in here. We'd love to have you join part of our family if you are listening on demand, or if you're watching on demand, or if you're listening via podcast app. Jump into our Discord. I'll put the links in the doodly-doo below. Bougie had asked in one of our D&D chats, is it, which dojo would you choose from Cobra Kai? I think they're both bad. They're both evil. They're both stupid. So there you go, Bougie. Congratulations. You choose. I think they're both sinful. With all of that being said, go out and play all the Destiny 2 that you guys can over the next couple of weeks. Join us as well. Perhaps we can start doing things for Templar, for Nav, for TheLift. I am Chino Mage. We are so thankful that you guys were here to join us on this Friday afternoon. We love you. We'll see you next time. Peace out, everybody.